Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to our final presentation of Tempering Tampa, an intervention strategy promoting ecological services. Presenting to you today are Ramel Fernandez, Maddie Hunt, myself, Tess Minotti, and Victoria Youssef. Now, the word tempering. This refers to the process of counterbalancing a force that has stressed a material, or neutralizing that force in order to strengthen the material. As we walk you through our analysis and our design, we will show you why and how we plan to restore the strength within our site. But before we do that, we will first introduce you to a larger ecological context that is important to the greater Tampa Bay region, and that is the seagrass meadow environment. Our site is located at the edge of Hillsborough Bay, which empties into Tampa Bay and then into the Gulf of Mexico. These bays are fringed along the coastline by a submergent grassland known as seagrass meadows. The coverage used to be much more extensive. You can see in yellow up on this map that it went up into McKay Bay, but it's not that way today. Now, why do I care about seagrass meadows, and why should you? They include several ecosystem services that include things like sediment stabilization, carbon sequestration, biodiverse habitats, and denitrification. But these environments are also very sensitive, being at the margin of the land and the sea, and it receives a lot of pollution like excess nutrient runoff, like from nitrogen and phosphorus. And this is not at all conducive to a healthy seagrass habitat. So now if we look historically, back between 1950 and 1980, we actually saw a decline of seagrass by almost 50% in all of Tampa Bay. We were able to reverse that trend, though, fortunately, through mitigating measures through reducing nitrogen going into the bay, and the seagrass did rebound accordingly, though not to the degree that we would like to see up in Hillsborough Bay. Corresponding to that increase in acreage that we saw over time, we also saw the impact monetarily in terms of cost savings associated with carbon sequestration and denitrification, thanks to the seagrass. Now that's up until today, and so the question is, going forward, we expect sea level rise, and as sea level rise, the seagrass environments will also migrate onto our site. So we need to be mindful not only of how we use our site now as it washes into the existing extent of seagrass in the bay, but we're also concerned about what this means for future seagrass within our site once sea level rises.
Now let's zoom out and take a look at the site context. Here we can see the land cover for the southern part of Florida and a focus on the city of Tampa, where our study area is located and outlined in black. The graph in the top right shows the changes in Tampa's land cover as percent of watershed from 1996 to 2010. In this graph, we can see how each habitat has improved, with the exception of forests and wetlands, which have decreased by 6%. The map in the bottom right simply is a small introduction of our site, showing some of the important features, such as a building footprint and drainage basins, that we will detail later on in this presentation.
So now that we've located our site, let's take a look at the habitats located in Tampa and how they interact with our site. Of the habitats in Tampa, we're going to look at the forest, scrub, wetland, and marine habitats. These habitats are critical to the survival of many endangered species and provide numerous ecological benefits. You can see in Tampa, a majority of all habitat is located in the north portion of the city and in the south near the bay. Within our site, small pockets of habitat can be seen scattered around, and a river flows along the perimeter of the site in the east and south and empties into the bay. A majority of the habitat seen within the site is located along this perimeter in the south, but despite this, there's still a significant lack of habitat in Tampa and thus the site as well.
When we look at the critical habitat for bird species in particular, we find that there are 5 threatened species that have habitats in the greater Tampa Bay region. And now if we look a little bit more closely at our site in particular, we see that 2 of these species already have habitat within our site, including the wood stork and the piping plover.
Now that we've taken a look at a few bird species, let's take a look at all the endangered and threatened species within the Hillsborough Bay. So we've split it up into two parts, endangered species and threatened species. The species symbols that are in turquoise and that blue color, those are species that rely on seagrass either to live in or in to eat. Then this line that comes out from the species name falls into the animal kingdom, either a reptile, a bird, mammal, plant, or fish, and then it zigzags its way into the habitat that it lives in, either forest, scrub, swamp, marsh, beaches and dunes, or marine. And then we have the percentage of what species lives in what habitats on the right-hand side.
Now let's take a closer look into the current land cover and land use. Regarding the land cover, our study area is for the most part developed. In fact, 76% of our site is developed and broken down in different intensities that are shown in shades of red. Regarding the current land use, there are very few green spaces. As a matter of fact, the only park in our study area is classified as public institutional, and so is the case with other green areas such as retention ponds. It is also important to point out that 30% of the land use is occupied by industrial uses, which increases the need for intervention.
So it's important to look at how we use the land from a watershed perspective. We'll start by zooming out quite a bit first and looking at the right-hand side on the map you see over there. You're looking at the entire Hillsborough Bay watershed, and you can see where our site falls down at the base of it. But now if we move to the left and we zoom in a bit, we can see where our site is located, and we can see the drainage patterns of the canal and some rivers that then feed down to the south towards our bay, towards our site and through our site to the bay. If we look at the kind of inset map of just our site location below that with the topo lines on it, you can see that we can subdivide our site into 5 sub-watersheds. Most of these are drained with water flowing into the canal, which then empties into the bay, all the way over to the western side. That part of the site actually just drains directly into the bay. So that's looking at drainage from the standpoint of kind of where the channels are located, but it's also important to recognize that overland flow also occurs, particularly when we have such extensive impervious surfaces in our site. So you'll see with the pie charts there at the bottom that 76% of our site is actually covered in impervious surface. And if we break that down by the different sub-watersheds, the largest one there in the middle, number 1, it actually has up to 80% impervious surface.
So we took our site and we broke it into 2 parts. The first part being disturbances. These are in the warm colors on the left, and the other part is species and habitats in the cool color in the center top. Maps were made, combined, and made again to generate our ecological intervention map. Tess will now go into more detail about the maps.
All right, so we'll look at the outputs from our suitability analysis. On the left-hand side first, we're going to look at the disturbance-related maps, and these are all colored with kind of warm tones, where the warmest tones, the reds and the oranges, correspond to areas of the highest disturbance. And we grouped our different disturbances into 2 main categories. We looked at point source solution and non-point source solution. We looked at things like brownfield locations and toxic release sites for that information. But then we were also interested in how those are further augmented by factors such as heavy precipitation patterns or drainage patterns. So when you take all of those and you fold them up together into one composite disturbance map, you see that a lot of our heaviest disturbance areas are actually located in the downtown Tampa region or within our site as well, over to the east of downtown. Now, we also looked at the positive aspects of the Tampa region and within our site as well, and those are related to where we do have positive features, where we have existing habitat already that we would like to take advantage of. And so we looked at things like land cover and conservation sites for this, and we folded those up into a composite species and habitat opportunities map. Here, the richest shades of green correspond to the areas with the highest opportunities, the areas with the healthiest habitats. We take those two composite maps and fold them together into one final map, which is of the ecological intervention. And now this one shows where everywhere that you have kind of brightest shade of green, these are areas that already have the healthiest habitats. And so you can see there's only about 5% of our site that has anything that's even remotely a good habitat. Most of our site is kind of medium to high disturbance levels that you see in the shades of orange and red.
So we then took two section cuts within our suitability model, one in the Ybor City drain and watershed and another in the Useto Yard drain watershed. These sections were then laid over our suitability map to show the advantages and disadvantages of each. In the Ybor City section, the one on top, it is important to note the runoff from the parking lot into the habitat then into the bay. In the Useto section on the bottom, it is important to note the lack of range from high to low and the large high disturbance within the rail yard. So now that we've taken a look at our suitability, where we notice that these highs, mediums, and low disturbances can help us create a design strategy based on the suitability map. And when we look at the next slide, we can then make program elements based on the design strategy to implement into our master plan, which we will show you later on. So now going back to our design strategy, it was based on the tempering process of steel. Since the rail yard is on our site, we thought it was appropriate to look into steel. The tempering process restructures, toughens, alleviates, and restores the steel to overall better it. Using those words, we created 4 categories that contains program elements like porous pavement, solar panels, vibration buffers, and habitat preserves that help overall better our site. Using the matrix, you can find what program elements that you need to help with either disturbances or to aid habitats within our site.
This map shows the future land use we propose for our study area. Our goals while planning for this land use map was to provide the community with an efficient use and access to resources and promoting social and environmental values. Some of the most significant shifts in land use allocation between the current land use and our proposed future land use is the reclassification of non-classified roadways as right-of-ways and separating the rail yard as a land use. We also designated green areas that were previously classified as public institutional into green space and natural areas, which now comprise 19% of the land use. Furthermore, we introduced mixed use into the equation, which is non-present in the current land use. And finally, all 6% of the vacant land has been allocated into the land use that best fits its location, condition, and overall potential. After analyzing the future land use breakdown in the bottom right, we managed to reduce the industrial land uses by 9%, while increasing residential land uses from less than 3% to 10%, as well as designating 7% of the land use to mixed use, which also provides some housing opportunities.
As shown from this map, this is the transportation hierarchy for our site. Red is the freeway, purple is the primary artery, dark pink is the minor artery, brown is a toll or a collecting road, and light pink is a local road. We are proposing a pedestrian land bridge for walking and for pedestrian bikes that would go over the rail yard and connect the northern part of our site to the southern part of our site.
And this would be our proposed building footprint. When it comes to buildings, we try to retain as much of them as possible, either by making them serve the same purpose or even repurposing them. We plan to remove only 15% of buildings, which are shown in yellow. We are also proposing 221 new buildings, shown in blue, which would increase the total number of buildings by approximately 8%.
Rather than identifying the key transportation arterials and then clustering the land use blocks around those nodes, we used an approach rooted in ecological theory in which habitats can be delineated as patches, and then connections between those different patches can be called corridors. So this first map you're looking at has only the existing ecological patches shown so far, where the green, dark green patches represent major patches, and then the brown ones represent minor patches. We define major patches as the ones with well-established vegetation over relatively large continuous areas. Habitats that are especially important to us also, like ones that assure seagrass health in the future, such as coastal wetlands, these are also considered major. The smaller and more remote patches are what we consider minor. The biggest point to note here, though, is that the center part of the site is lacking in habitat patches currently. And the patches that you do see, especially those scattered to the north, are quite fragmented in nature. The second map that you're seeing illustrates now what we propose as additional habitat patches. So those appear now in the lighter shades of green and tan. Note that that many of these patches that we've added are actually building off of some of the existing ones. So in addition to identifying and planning those isolated patches, it's important to design linkages between the patches in the form of corridors. This map highlights the hierarchy of corridors, major and minor, as well as their users, which fall into two different categories. The first is a yellow-green shade, and those correspond to the corridors that are used by humans and wildlife. And then the blue-green shades of corridors are those that are used by wildlife only. These corridors are critical for establishing a resilient ecosystem, allowing migration of both humans and wildlife alike across an otherwise very fragmented landscape. While our plan focuses within our site boundary, we paid mind to how these corridors also connect to habitats outside the site as well. And so for that, I've illustrated it with these arrows here. So examples of connections via corridors such as greenways and eco-boulevards are annotated by the arrows that you see right now. These represent internal migration pathways for animals and humans. But corridors that approach the boundaries of the site and kind of set things up for opportunities for connections beyond the site to neighboring forested areas or wetlands are shown by these additional arrows. One of the key motivations behind our design is to prepare the site for changing climate and sea level rise, particularly in order for seagrass habitats to thrive and to migrate successfully onto what is currently dry land, with their lateral migration keeping pace with the rising seas. So therefore, we strategically preserved freshwater wetland environments in what would become eventually the seagrass migration path, with the expectation that those wetlands will eventually transition into estuarine and then marine environments 100 years from now. That potential seagrass environment migration corridor is denoted right here on this map with that shaded polygon. So I'll leave that shaded polygon on for a moment as I transition to the habitats map. If we look at it here, you can see that a lot of the habitats that are beneath that shaded polygon or the seagrass migration corridor are designed as either freshwater or brackish water wetlands. So I'll just remove that so you can see it more carefully now. If we look at this map, we're seeing that we're trying to promote 11 different natural habitat types across the entire site. Some of these include marshy wetland environments, like we already mentioned, particularly along those existing waterways or the low-lying areas more inland. These wetlands are going to be especially important in managing stormwater runoff, and then the mangrove forests down along the southern site boundary will aid in resisting storm surge. Tree canopy is also an important habitat that we've kind of populated the site with, and it fills in areas particularly up to the north. And this is going to be helpful not just as habitat for different types of avian and other types of wildlife, but is also important for mitigating urban heat island effect. So we had mentioned earlier in the presentation that there are a number of different specific species of animals and plants that are threatened in the Tampa Bay region. And a lot of the habitats that we've selected and incorporated into our design will be habitats that are favorable to those species. And some of those species are going to include animals like sea turtles and manatees and different types of seagrass, which will thrive down in the southwest corner of our site in our seagrass environment. But I'd like to take a moment just to take another step back so that we can see the significance of our site in a broader regional ecological context. So what you're looking at here are habitat patches at a regional scale, where the darkest green represents kind of major regional habitat patches. And there are kind of more muted shades of green that correspond to kind of more minor habitat patches. And the kind of grassy green that you see speckled throughout is tree canopy. That jade shade of green that you see fringing a lot of the different bodies of water, including the Hillsborough Bay, that corresponds to existing seagrass coverage. But what you'll notice is that there's a paucity of patches currently in our site, and you'll also see that there's a corridor that corresponds to the existing canal and river that connects our bay down in McKay Bay all the way up to that northernmost patch. So what we're aiming to do with our design is to populate our site with many different ecological habitat patches so that we can then create kind of a stepping stone sort of corridor that helps connect the habitat down in the bay up to the other regional existing habitats.
This master plan collects the ideas from every map you've just seen into one composite image. We've planned the site with 3 distinct districts in mind. So the first district is located in the northern portion of the site. The area has been planned to experience an increase in density over time in accordance with sea level rise. Vacant lots will become commercial areas and neighborhood pocket parks, as well as community gardens and housing. Mixed-use amenities are added to encourage a diversified range of commercial function. An existing small park will be expanded south into a nature park with trails, playing fields, and a community rec center, which extends to the rail yard. A green corridor running north to south along 50th Street in the west will begin in the first district and continue south to connect all districts with cycling lanes, pedestrian paths, and bioswales. The second district will continue to hold a majority of the remaining heavy industry, including the rail yard, but will include additional green spaces and ecological programs like green roofs and solar panels. A land bridge with pedestrian trails and habitat corridors is located in the east portion of the site, and it will go over the rail yard to provide a connection from a hotel and communities in the first district to a commercial area on the other side of the rail yard. The final district will experience the most change due to sea level rise, and because of this, development of this district is minimal and heavily focused on the conservation of habitats already present. As sea level rises, seagrass is expected to follow it up into our site. The goal of the planning behind this district is to nurture existing and additional habitat, preparing it for sea level rise, and to provide recreational and educational opportunities to the community in the meantime. Trails and boardwalks connect different habitats located within the district and provide access to a number of activities, including wildlife viewing spots, camping areas, and kayak docks. Together, the districts combine to create an environment which works to support life beyond the human scale. Next, we will take a closer look at the programming that will bring this about. Listed on the right are our proposed program elements. These elements are structured in accordance with our design strategy and tempering verbiage. I've already mentioned a number of the programs we've planned for the site, like the land bridge, neighborhood pocket parks, community gardens, bioswales, green roofs, and more. But on top of this, the addition of riparian corridors, nature parks, and porous pavement in industrial areas will serve to restructure the ecological composition of the site. The site will be toughened through programming like ecotourism, community centers, and estuary research. We will restore natural areas of the site with programs like habitat preservation, pollinator gardens, and endangered animal sanctuaries. And lastly, the addition of rainwater harvesting programs, retention areas, vibration buffers in the railway, and artificial trees in urban spaces serve to alleviate the ecological burdens the site experiences. Moving forward, we are going to look at how some of this programming has the potential to transform the site.
If we take a look at the Arbor Drains City section, again, we can compare the section with the disturbances on the top and the same section but with elements from our master plan on the bottom. We have removed the parking lot and added a variety of habitats that can help with runoff but also support the threatened and endangered species. This next section was the Uceda yard drain section. As said before, there is a high disturbance, which is the rail yard, and a lack of variety in this section. Now looking at the bottom section with our master plan program elements, we can see the disturbance has lessened and there is more variance between the colors. This is important to make boundaries that can filter the runoff and help with the vibration and sound disturbances. Now, looking at the northeast part of the site, we can start to see how patches are in action. The patches circled are tree covers, including an urban tree cover on the left and a scrub patch tree cover on the right, a park that is in a new office site that we created, and then a minor patch would be the meadow that surrounds the train yard. The next section, or the next slide, we'll take a look at the corridors that connect these patches together. One of the easy corridors to spot is the river. The river connects the site from the northeast part all the way down to the southwest. Another corridor is the Urban Ecological Boulevard. This connects the southern part to the northern part. Another type of corridor is the green roofs. This makes a corridor within an urban environment. Now, if we take a look at the Tampa Land Bridge, we can see that there's a trail that leads to it. On the left side is a train, walled off by a green vibration buffer. Moving to the right is the meadow that surrounds the rail yard. The trail itself will have benches for seating and room for walking and for pedestrian bikes. Separating the path is a green bioswale that collects rain, water, and provides extra green our site so desperately needs.
This is our urban ecological boulevard perspective, illustrating some mixed-use buildings, which can include a combination of residential, commercial, and retail uses, and have well-known environmental, economical, and social benefits. This eco boulevard is located along North 50th Avenue, which are primary transportation arteries. Our design for this eco boulevard includes wide sidewalks, bike lanes, bioswales, and a green median with sufficient trees. It will provide a great habitat for the different species and also increase community engagement in an area that is inviting and safe for pedestrians.
This image depicts a rendering of a portion of the proposed expansion of Oak Park. Oak Park is currently the only park within the site with a small community center and sports field. In order to connect and expand habitat patches, as well as provide outdoor recreational opportunities for both children and adults in the area, Oak Park will be expanded south until it reaches the rail yard. Located near mixed-use amenities and the Eco Boulevard on 50th Avenue, a large community and recreation center will be built to accommodate growth over time. Walking and cycling trails lead from this center to the rest of the park. Open green space around the community center allows for a variety of recreational and communal activities for all ages and abilities. And boardwalks allow users to observe wildlife and traverse through an open wetland landscape located in a portion of the park. This wetland also acts as a retention area to alleviate stormwater runoff.
So we saw from the master plan that the southwest corner of the site will be reserved and promoted as a nature preserve, where as sea level rises, seagrass beds will be planted and protected, transforming this part of the bay into a habitat teeming with wildlife. Low impact activities such as bird watching and kayaking will be encouraged, as well as single-track hiking trails through the mangrove and scrub environments. In addition to habitat, the mangroves provide coastal erosion protection and carbon sequestration. This estuarine wetland environment will be the twin to a similar type of nature preserve on the opposite side of McKay Bay.
All of our research in our master plan that we created is there to save important coastal habitats in the Tampa Bay region, including seagrass meadows, which are vulnerable to environmental and human-caused disturbances. Thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation.